The first bullet shattered the frost-covered window before Leo's mind could fully understand what his eyes were seeing. And he had been watching the gray sedan crawl past Old Joe's burger joint for the third time, its tires hissing softly over slushy pavement while dirty snow sat piled along the curb. That deep animal instinct inside him screaming that something was wrong in the way it only does when you grow up in a neighborhood where winter nights are quiet because people are afraid, not peaceful. And before we continue, make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because what happened next unfolded in seconds as the barrel slid out of the passenger window like a black, frozen snake. And Leo didn't think, because thinking takes time and time gets people killed. So his body moved on instinct, boots slipping slightly on the greasy, cold tile as he covered the 12 feet between his usual corner booth and the window seat where Mia sat hunched. Over her calculus homework in her winter coat, scarf loose around her neck, unaware of anything beyond numbers and formulas, and he slammed into her just as the world exploded into sound, glass, and fire, dragging her down as chairs toppled and shattered ice-like shards rained through the air, bullets tearing through the diner while the smell of gunpowder mixed with fryer grease and the sharp bite of winter air rushing inside. Pain blooming across Leo's back like burning coals shoved beneath. His skin as one bullet tore through his shoulder and another ripped low near his ribs. But beneath him, Mia was screaming, alive, shaking, her breath fogging the air. And that was enough as Leo's vision narrowed. Darkness creeping in from the edges while the last thing he saw was her pale face framed by falling snowflakes drifting through the broken window, her gray eyes wide with fear and something close to recognition. Her lips forming words he couldn't hear over the ringing in his ears, words that would have changed everything if he'd stayed awake long enough to understand them. Leo Martinez had spent his life mastering invisibility, especially during long winters when patched jackets and worn shoes made kids like him stand out, learning to take up as little space as possible at Riverside High, avoiding certain hallways, eating alone, surviving, and Old Joe's was his refuge when the heat got shut off at home and eviction notices stacked up like snowstorms that never ended. A place where he could stretch a cheap plate of fries and do homework under buzzing lights while pretending things were normal. And that Tuesday evening felt colder than usual, the kind of winter dust that settles into your bones, when Mia Chun, who had transferred weeks earlier and kept to herself like someone hiding from the cold, sat by the window again, too polished for this place, too quiet, always alone. And Leo noticed the sedan pass once, then twice, then a third time, its windows dark against the fading light. His stomach tightening as old instincts whispered danger while Mia stayed lost in her work, unaware that death was slowing right outside. When the car stopped, when a window rolled down and the gun appeared, Leo moved without choice, crossing the distance as snow began drifting heavier outside, slamming into her just as bullets tore through the diner. And when the gunfire finally stopped, silence rushed and broken only by screams, sirens echoing faintly through the cold, and the low thunder of motorcycle engines rolling closer like an approaching storm. Mia kneeling in Leo's blood with shaking hands as she made a call she'd been trained her whole life to make, her voice steady despite the chaos, knowing that winter had finally caught up to her no matter how hard she tried to live normally. She had always known this day might come, growing up as the daughter of Rocco the Rock Valentino, a man whose world was built on iron, loyalty, and violence. And when war broke out between rival clubs weeks earlier, she'd been hidden away at Riverside under a fake name, told to blend in until the snow melted and things calmed down. But now a boy she barely knew had thrown himself in a gunfire meant for her. And as bikers surrounded the diner with engines steaming in the cold, securing the scene, Mia pressed her hands against Leo's wounds and begged him to stay. Because he hadn't just saved her life, he'd shattered the last illusion of safety she had left. And as the Phantom Kings prepared for vengeance under gray winter skies, one truth settled heavily over them all like fresh snow on broken ground. Debts had been made, and in this world, debts were always paid. Mia's voice shook as she told her father how brave Leo had been, how he hadn't known her at all and still stepped in a gunfire. And Rocco listened in silence before promising that such courage would never be meaningless, that Leo would never regret saving her. Then he gently sent Mia upstairs to clean herself and change because he didn't want blood to be the first thing Leo saw when he woke. And as she left, she paused to tell him Leo's full name, which Rocco repeated slowly like a vow, already, deciding that the Phantom Kings would remember it. And when Leo finally woke hours later in a quiet hospital room filled with the hum of heaters fighting the winter cold, pain crashed into him like ice water as monitors beeped and fluorescent lights glared down, his back burning with every breath until he noticed a massive biker sitting guard beside his bed, who calmly gave him water, explained Mia was safe, and told him he'd been unconscious for 14 hours and nearly died. News that barely registered compared to the relief that she was alive. And when panic about his grandmother spilled out, Bull assured him she'd been cared for, visited, and protected, along with his medical bills being paid, leaving Leo stunned and struggling to understand why strangers would do this for him. Until Bull explained the truth about Mia, being Rocco Valentino's daughter, and that the bullets Leo took were meant to hurt the club, and that he'd acted without knowing, without asking for anything, which made his bravery rare. And moments later, Rocco himself entered the room like a winter storm given human form, radiating danger and control as he studied Leo closely before thanking him in the only way a man like him could, by acknowledging the impossible gift of his daughter's life, asking questions about the shooter, and quietly confirming that justice was already in motion, leaving Leo with the unsettling knowledge that consequences had been delivered in places he would never see. When Mia later came in, stripped of her school armor and looking smaller in borrowed clothes, she thanked Leo through tears, apologizing for the danger that followed her. And he took her hand and told her it wasn't her fault, that someone had to choose kindness in a cold world. And over the next few winter days, the hospital became an unlikely refuge as Leo healed slowly, visited by his grandmother, clutching rosary beads, by Mia doing homework beside him, and by rotating Phantom Kings guards who brought candy, chess games, and quiet protection, until the doctor finally cleared him to go home with strict warnings, and Rocco returned with hard truths, confirming the attackers were gone and offering money not as charity, but as responsibility, easing the weight of rent, food, and survival Leo had carried alone for too long. And when Mia arrived with replacement clothes, books, and a leather jacket that fit him perfectly, Leo barely recognized the person staring back from the mirror, someone who looked like he belonged somewhere. And as Bull drove him home through gray winter streets with bikes escorting them, Leo watched his old neighborhood pass by unchanged while feeling completely different inside. And when Bull told him that being one of theirs meant he mattered, the words hit harder than any bullet ever could, because for the first time in his life, wrapped in winter air and borrowed leather, Leo Martinez wasn't invisible, and he wasn't alone. Nino Bull had barely parked the truck before Leo's grandmother pulled the door open and wrapped him in a fierce hug, her thin arms shaking as she held him, and pain flared through his healing back. But Leo didn't pull away because he had missed this more than he realized. The smell of her lavender soap and peppermint candies grounding him after weeks of hospitals and cold white rooms. Snow flurries drifted through the air around them, melting on Bull's leather jacket as his grandmother cried and scolded Leo in rushed Spanish, calling him brave and foolish and swearing this would never happen again. And Leo just held her, letting her fear spill out because winter made everything feel sharper, colder, more fragile. When she finally stepped back, her eyes turned sharp as knives toward Bull, who straightened instantly, understanding enough of her tone, even if not every word, and promised he'd taken care of Leo. She studied the massive biker for a long moment, then nodded once and thanked him, before guiding Leo toward their apartment building with one hand gripping his arm as if the icy wind itself might steal him away. Bull stopped them and handed Leo a phone. Not his old cracked one, but a solid smartphone in a thick case, explaining it was from the club and already had numbers saved if Leo ever needed help, day or night. Leo thanked him quietly, still unsure how to accept things like this. And Bull reminded him to keep the jacket on because winter streets were cold and people thought twice when they saw Phantom King's colors. And then the bikes rolled off into the gray evening like a guard of honor disappearing into the snow. Inside, the apartment felt warmer than Leo remembered. The radiator clanking like always, the walls peeling like always, but the smell of home-cooked food cutting through the winter chill. His grandmother had made his favorite chicken and rice, and they ate while frost crept along the windows. And she told him about gossip in the building, neighbors whispering wild theories about gangs and secrets, none of them knowing the truth. She admitted Bull had brought money for food and bills, her voice cautious, asking where it came from. And Leo told her carefully it was from grateful people whose daughter he had helped. She studied him for a long moment, then spoke softly about danger and goodness, about how being safe was not always enough in a cold world, and finally took his hand and told him his good heart was why he was still alive. A few days later, with winter pressing down hard, Leo returned to school expecting stares and questions, but nothing prepared him for Bull and Reaper knocking on his door before sunrise to give him a ride. When they pulled up to the school, engines rumbling in the frozen air, the entire courtyard fell silent, breath turning to mist as students stared at the two bikers walking Leo inside. Faces he'd known for years suddenly looked unsure, even afraid, and Bull's calm warning glance toward the usual bullies was enough to make them look away. After the bikes left, the whispers followed Leo down the hall until Mia appeared at his locker, smiling like she always did, warm and steady despite the cold, and walked with him to class like it was the most normal thing in the world. At lunch, she waited for him at a center table, right in the open, daring anyone to say something, and Leo sat beside her, heart pounding but oddly calm, because after bullets and blood, high school fear felt small. When Brett Hoffman came over, pale and nervous, and apologized for everything, Leo listened and accepted it without anger, realizing winter had stripped things down to what mattered. As he sat with Mia, snow tapping against the cafeteria windows, Leo understood his life had shifted, not into something easier, but into something real, where he was seen, protected, and no longer invisible, even as the cold season settled deep around them.